All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. As I mentioned, this is the presentation on the draft policy recommendations that have been put together by a task force on the green rental housing policy. So I'm happy to have you all here. Thank you for coming. My name is Zach. I am a community engagement specialist in the Office of Sustainability, which is, we are the driving force behind the green rental housing policy. In terms of today's presentation, it is one of two presentations. Both presentations will provide the same information. They're simply offered at different times of day and different days of the week, so that we can reach as many people as possible. The next presentation will be March 15th at 6 p.m. You're welcome to attend that if you attend this one. This presentation is also being recorded, and a recording will be posted to the city website, and you will be able to watch it later. The presentation today is on the policy recommendations that the task force of stakeholders put together. I'll talk more about them in a little bit. And this presentation is also the launch of the public comment period for these recommendations. So there is an accompanying survey, and this will be open until April 10th. And we're hoping to get as much feedback between now and then as possible. I'm going to keep this slide up for just a bit so that you can type this URL into your browser, or you can write it down, because today's presentation is only half of the goal. While we do want to share the information and get the word out as much as possible, the other goal of today's presentation is the survey that accompanies this presentation. And you can find the survey at this website. While you're getting that open, I want to remind you that everything I'm about to share with you is still in draft form. The policy recommendations are just that, they're recommendations. Before they move on, we want to hear from the community. We want to hear your feedback. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? We want to make sure that everything makes sense. So please be sure to fill out the survey that goes along with it. A quick overview of the timeline that's yet to come is that after the public comment period closes on April 10th, we will analyze all of the responses that we've received. If there are any major changes that are recommended from the public comment, we'll go back to the task force and have them review what those changes were. And then once we feel good about what we have, we'll move forward to legal review, and then it goes to council after that. So there's still quite a bit yet to go in this process. Nothing is final, but we do want to get your feedback on what we can here. Okay, so this link is also at the bottom of every page, so I'm going to go proceed. Here's kind of what an agenda for today will look like. I am going to start with some background about why the Green Rental Housing Program has been an area of focus for the Office of Sustainability and Innovations. And then I'll discuss how the current policy recommendations came about. After that, we'll take a look at what the policy recommendations are after a short break, and then what the timeline has been and what upcoming engagement we're doing. Of course, after we cover all of that information, there will be time for Q&A at the end of this session. So you're welcome to submit questions during the presentation. If you need something clarified or something seems backwards, feel free to submit a question. Otherwise, we will open the floor for open Q&A at the end of the presentation. Okay, so getting into it, to set the stage for this conversation, there are some things that we'd like to identify, and that is that when examining the greenhouse gas emissions that Ann Arbor is responsible for, according to our most recent inventory, we see that 2/3 of those emissions come from buildings. And when we examine the residential buildings in Ann Arbor, we find that more than half of all the housing properties are currently rented. There are currently no existing initiatives for addressing climate change related to housing. And so that presents a pretty substantial opportunity for us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by exploring policies that focus on buildings. I want to take a moment to clarify that there are a suite of programs that the Office of Sustainability and Innovations is unveiling. Most recently, the commercial benchmarking program passed City Council unanimously, and that focuses on commercial buildings for 20,000 square feet and larger. This program focuses just on the rented residential, and there are also another program that we are concurrently exploring that will explore owner-occupied residential. So this is by no means the only approach to addressing carbon emissions that come from buildings, but it is certainly an important one. Also, to set the stage, I want to point out that here in Ann Arbor, there is already an existing rental housing inspection process. The entirety of Chapter 105 of Title 8 of the City Code of Ordinances is specifically the Housing Code. This is the code that all rentals must abide by, and it is enforced by Rental Housing Services, which is under the building department at the city. And the Housing Code states that all rental units must be inspected and certified by a city inspector prior to being allowed to rent. And so that certification process comes in the form of what's called a certificate of compliance. And that states that an inspector has seen the unit and verifies that all items that are outlined in Chapter 105 have been satisfied. Currently, however, there are no energy efficiency requirements explicitly in Chapter 105. And so that's where some of this green rental housing program comes from, is to make sure that we are including energy efficiency requirements. And that is because when A20 was developed, an action was specifically targeted at rental efficiency. And that was included under Strategy 3 of the A20 plan. Strategy 3 is to broadly improve the energy efficiency of our buildings. And Action 8 is to promote a green rental housing program. But that's not the only A20 alignment. The green rental housing program also helps fulfill the first action that's listed under Strategy 2, which is to help get off fossil fuels. And we must electrify wherever possible to realize A20. And if you're wondering what A20 is, I'll take a step back to state that A20 is Ann Arbor's plan to achieve a just transition to carbon neutrality by 2030. The A20 plan was unanimously adopted by City Council on June 1st of 2020. So we have not only a climate imperative to support these strategies, but a local directive from our leaders. And so the Green Rental Housing Program is directly fulfilling these strategies. And so that's why we worked with a task force to put them together. So before we even began designing Ann Arbor's Green Rental Housing Program as it currently exists, our first step was to understand as much as possible about how to build such a program. So over a year ago, we participated in a rental cohort with RMI, formerly the Rocky Mountain Institute, to examine specifically policy pathways for implementing rental policies. And this cohort looked at a number of different states and a number of different pathways to help local municipalities understand how they could explore rental efficiency policies. Since then, we have also participated in a rental efficiency learning group that is still ongoing, and we are continuing to learn. And that is presented in part by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And so we're exploring different policy designs and different ways to implement policies, and also how to make those policies equitable. Both during those cohorts and beyond those cohorts, we examined how other cities across the country have developed their rental programs, how they've developed their efficiency programs, and how they've developed their housing programs, and what their lessons learned from their experiences were. And we are working to apply those learned experiences to best leverage our program. And so there is a spectrum of different programs that you can see at different cities. And there were some things that were used in other cities that weren't applicable to Ann Arbor, but they still helped inform how we can best develop our own program here in Ann Arbor. These are just a few of the other cities and programs that we explored. So, equipped with what we had learned through that previous groundwork, we began looking more closely at the particulars here in Ann Arbor. This really helps paint the picture. So some of the information that we found is that our existing rental stock is comprised of over 31,000 rental units, and those are spread across 8,500 properties. The median year built for these rental properties is 1964, with some rentals dating back even as far as 1850. And so we have an aging rental stock where most of the homes were built prior to any existing efficiency codes in Michigan. We didn't even have any energy efficiency requirements in Michigan building codes before 1977. So that, as we can see from that, there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of the energy efficiency of a lot of the rentals that are currently on the market. And so we explored some of the learning groups. We looked at other cities. We examined Ann Arbor, and then it was time to start building our own program. And so we invited representatives from a broad spectrum of perspectives to participate. We had tenants who were on the task force, and tenants who represented broader tenant organizations. So they had representation from the Intercooperative Council, from the Ann Arbor Tenants Union, from the Housing Caucus of the Graduate Employees Organization. We also had landlords on this same task force, and they had representation as well beyond who was there. So the Washington Area Apartment Association was represented, Avalon Housing, Greek Housing, multifamily units. And beyond that, many of the landlords are also dual qualified, meaning that they are not only landlords, but there are architects and engineers and licensed builders. And this group convened over 8 months, and we started last June and wrapped up the first part of the task force in January of this year, 2022. And during that time, we saw some presentations from RMI and USDN and ACEEE, who I've already mentioned, and came in and presented to our task force so that we could see directly what some of their best practices and findings have been. The task force took time to define certain challenges and opportunities, and really try to figure out how we can begin to address this split incentive. And the split incentive can be loosely defined as the flow of investments not being spread equally among the participants. So where one party is responsible for making improvements or modifications, there's another party that is doesn't have any say in that, but is still with the unit as it is. All right. Let's see here. Okay. So now that we've looked at how some of these, how this task force and the policy recommendations came about, let's take a closer look at what these policy recommendations actually are. From a high level overview, these are essentially what the policy recommendations are. It's allowing occupants to do basic weatherization. It is setting an efficiency standard for the appliances that are in the units. It's requiring certain efficiency components of the unit themselves. And then it's also allowing for the unit efficiency to be publicly disclosed. So let's dive in and take a closer look at each of those. Let's start with the appliances that are in rentals. The reason this was included is because the energy that's required for space and water heating accounts for a vast majority of the residential energy consumption. And therefore, one of the most impactful ways to reduce the carbon emissions that are resulting from the operation of the heating appliances and to reduce the overall demand on the energy infrastructure, we explored how we can make the appliances which heat our homes and water as efficient as possible. In addition to heating our space and our water, all the other appliances have an impact too. So we're talking about refrigerators and dishwashers and clothes washers and dryers and air conditioners and ventilation fans. And while not all of these appliances are in all rentals, the goal of this policy element is to consider that when those are offered in a rental unit, that they be as efficient as possible. And that's because improving the appliance efficiency both reduces the cost of operation to the individuals who are responsible for the energy bills. In Ann Arbor, that in many cases, that is the tenant. And lowering the energy costs for tenants is especially impactful here in Ann Arbor, where the cost of rent alone can be bordering or is sometimes fully prohibitive to some residents. In terms of or in the cases when the landlords are responsible for the energy bills, increasing the appliance efficiency just reduces their own energy bills and can result in financial return on their investments. So this policy element states that all appliances that are in rentals must be Energy Star rated. Energy Star is a joint program of the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency. Energy Star has been around for a long time, and it's a well-respected labeling program that identifies the top performing and most cost-effective products for homes and buildings. It's ubiquitous among appliance dealers and retailers and contractors and installers and manufacturers and consumers. Surely we've seen on some appliances in our own homes a yellow tag that gives an estimated cost of operation on an annual basis for that appliance. That's the Energy Star rating. And so while we believe that most rentals in the city will already achieve this policy component, we just want to make sure that it's expected of all rentals. And so that kind of equalizes the expectations. The way this would be unveiled is through what is called a time of replacement. And so that allows what is existing to still be there until it reaches the end of its natural life cycle. So as appliances age and die out either due to age or wear and tear, the requirement here is that when it's being replaced, the new appliance chosen is simply an Energy Star rated appliance. And while we looked at a number of different appliances and that cost differential between just the cost of replacement and choosing a Energy Star rated product of a similar value, that there is minimal cost difference between the two. When you're talking about the life cycle of these appliances, which can be 10 or 20 years, a cost difference of about $300 to $500 is pretty insignificant in terms of what the overall cost of the appliance is. And the expectation is currently that by 2030, all appliances in rentals will be Energy Star rated. Okay, and there is, moving on to the next policy element, we are exploring how to improve the overall efficiency of the rental units. And so the task force came up with a dual option scenario that allows landlords the flexibility to choose which pathway makes the most sense for them. The first one that we're going to look at right now is the prescriptive checklist pathway. So this sets an energy efficiency target for rentals. It gives landlords the flexibility to decide how they can best reach compliance. And the reason that we explored a policy element that considers the efficiency of the overall unit is that as we covered earlier, most of the rentals in Ann Arbor were constructed at a time before there were any modern building codes. And these codes have been designed to improve the health, the safety, the comfort, and efficiency of the places we live. And so while a portion of these rentals have seen some degree of updates, many rentals still only meet the building code requirements that were in place at the time that they were originally constructed. And that leaves renters exposed to units that would not meet today's standards for modern living. But this process of improving rentals also benefits landlords by connecting them to resources to make wise energy investments in their properties, and by possibly improving the marketability of their units. And so there is this prescriptive pathway involves a checklist that expands upon the existing pre-inspection checklist, which does not include any energy efficiency. And so let's take a quick look at that. This is just a snapshot of just some of the items that are included on the existing pre-inspection checklist, which again is just referencing Chapter 105. And these are the requirements that all rentals must already meet to get a certificate of compliance in Ann Arbor. This is kind of small, so I don't intend for you to be able to read all of this. It is publicly available on the city website. But what I want to point out here are that the things on this portion of the list are targeted at basic safety. Things like certain storage restraints around combustion appliances. That makes sense. You don't want anything that can catch on fire too close to your furnace or your gas-fired water heater, because that can be a fire hazard. So that's a good item to have in there. There are also things on here about having secure locks on the doors. That's certainly a safety concern. And so while the items that are on the pre-inspection checklist already are certainly important, and they're on this checklist for good reason, perhaps you can see that the existing checklist does not really include things like energy efficiency and electrification, both of which have really great impacts on the comfort and affordability of rentals for tenants. I'm going to, this time, let's see, I'm going to jump over and show you, we're going to walk through what this prescriptive checklist would include in addition to the existing pre-inspection checklist. Give me just a moment here. Okay. So what you should be seeing now is the draft prescriptive pathway checklist. Again, this is a draft. So everything here is was compiled in a way that is designed to be as solid as possible. But again, that's what this public comment and presentation is for. We want to hear back from you, your thoughts on this checklist, and make sure that it does make sense. A lot of the things on this checklist were put together using existing standards that have been put together by various organizations. Some things are pulled from the existing Michigan Energy Code, the Michigan Residential Code, the International Energy Conservation Code, the Zero Energy Ready Code from the DOE, Green Star, Living Building Challenge, the Passive House Institute, and they were compiled onto this list to help encourage rentals to meet some standardized expectation for energy efficiency. Now, that said, if you have a rental that already meets the certification of one of these organizations, say you already have a passive house certification, then you won't be required to complete this checklist or the performance pathway. And the performance pathway is the other option for the unit efficiency. And we'll get to that in a moment. But my point is that if you already have a green certification of some sort, that will suffice and for the unit efficiency requirement. Okay, so we'll dive into this. This would be, again, added to the current list of requirements. And so what you'll see on here are things like insulation, where a number of rentals don't have insulation. We would like to see some insulation to improve the comfort and the health of that unit. The way these sections are structured are that there is a maximum possible number of points that you can get in this section. And if you took out a calculator right now and you added up all these numbers, you would see that they don't add up to 9. And that is because you would only get points from one line item on each of these. And so where you have done the work for that line item, you would get just those points and not anything else preceding that. So the maximum that you can get in this is 9. We added a target minimum in here, and that is important to note that it's not a required minimum for this section. One of the strengths of this checklist is that it gives landlords the flexibility to be able to meet the minimum overall point requirement by any route that they see fit. So whatever makes the most sense for that unit, they can do. That said, this target minimum is a suggestion of what should be relatively easy to achieve in this section, and that you can aim for to help get your minimum of 65 points. And so once we go through this entire checklist, if you were to achieve everything that's on here, there is a total possible point value of over 173 points. And this checklist just asks that you meet 65. And so before, I'm going to go through more of the line items, but before I do that, I want to add a clarification that this point value would be required, as is everything else on the existing checklist. If you are choosing to follow the prescriptive checklist, you must meet 65 points, just like you must have secure locks, just like you must have the restraints on storage around combustion appliances. Everything that is in that pre-inspection checklist must be met, or you won't pass that inspection, and you're given an opportunity to correct those items for a re-inspection. And so the same thing would apply here. If you don't have 65 points, you would be given an opportunity to achieve 65 points. And then you, once you do, then you would receive your certificate of compliance. So we'll take a look at a few other things here. Also, quick plug, this is also available right now on the city website. So if you want to look at this on your own and be able to scroll through it, you can find it at the green rental housing page of the sustainability site. So there are things like air sealing, which have a great impact on the efficiency of a unit, which is often measured in air changes per hour. And so that's talking about the envelope of the building. The envelope is the barrier between the conditioned space inside your home and outside. And the tighter that envelope is, the more efficiently your heating and cooling appliances will work. So you get certain points for having certain envelope tightness. The more sealed up your unit is, the more points you can get. There are also a lot of these things, while some of them require a certified HERS rater or someone to come do a blower door test, you don't have to do that. That's again, the strength of this checklist is its flexibility. And so you can get points elsewhere if that's not something that makes sense for your rental unit. There are a lot of DIY items that you can do on here. Caulking goes a long way when it comes to air sealing. If there's recessed lighting in there, you can get certain recessed lighting canisters that have insulation built into them, so they form a nice tight air seal. And so this is just encouraging folks to achieve the low-hanging fruit. And again, the low-hanging fruit is what drove that minimum point value of 65. If you get all the low-hanging fruit, you should be able to hit 65 points on here. Another section on here is electrification. Switching to LED light bulbs is a high impact item, and it's also a low cost. So there's a quick turnaround on that investment, and LED lighting is readily available in just about any style that you can imagine these days. Furthermore, if you upgrade your panel so that it is ready to go for future appliances and for EV chargers, you will get points for that as well. The point values for each action item that are on this checklist have been designed to reflect the effort and or the cost required to achieve that. And so certain things have higher point values than the others, and that's where that point value comes from. One of the things we're looking for in this survey are your thoughts on these point values. Is there something in here in particular that should be worth more or worth less? We'd love to hear your feedback. There is a section in here for appliances. And yes, while there is a separate section of this proposed green rental housing policy that requires appliances to be Energy Star rated as they get replaced, we wanted to be sure to allow landlords to get points for having done that. And so we included those into this checklist. So you can kind of, you can double dip on that. If you've got the Energy Star rated appliances, great, you're going to get the points and you're going to satisfy the appliance efficiency requirement. You'll see that only the highest efficiency gas appliances will get any points at all. And that is because we are really trying to encourage electrification. Gas ultimately is a fossil fuel and presents a lot of health concerns when for in-home combustion of fossil fuels. It can sometimes, just from having a gas stove and a gas water heater and a gas furnace, can create health concerns within the home, because the air quality can actually exceed what the EPA allows legally allows for the outside air quality. And that's the inside of our homes that we're breathing. And so that's why we're really encouraging electrification in these cases. And again, not all of these appliances will be offered in all rentals. So things like a dishwasher, you don't have to offer that. But if you do, you're improving the overall quality of your rental. And if it's Energy Star rated, you get an extra point for that. So wherever possible, we're trying to allow for points. Same with heating and cooling throughout the house. Of course, air source heat pumps are the most efficient way to heat your home, that air source and geothermal ground source as well. So you can get a lot of points for those. The distribution system, so the ductwork in the house, it can result in a lot of energy efficiency losses if they are leaky. And so we want to see that wherever possible, those ducts are sealed so that whatever is heating your home is delivering that air as efficiently as possible. We also would like to see that ducts are insulated so that what gets to the actual register by the time it has passed through the house and all of the ductwork is as close to the original temperature that was delivered from the heating unit. And so we'd like to see it not only sealed up, but insulated wherever possible. We'd like to see some zoning for thermostats. There are a number of units throughout the city where certain tenants in a multifamily unit do not have any control. Sometimes in duplexes or triplexes, there's only one thermostat that controls the heat for the entire house. And we're encouraging landlords to separate that, and we'll award points for that so that each unit has control of their own temperature. Same goes for things like hot water pipes. Whoops, sorry. We want it to see those as insulated as possible and see a barrier between the hot and cold water supplies. Certain ventilation throughout the house can receive point values. Let's see, this got cut off here, but a Wi-Fi enabled thermostat is something that can make it really easy to adjust the heat, the temperature inside your unit, and therefore save on the emissions that are being wasted. If you forget to turn down your heat, you can just do it remotely when you're not home. In terms of health, there are carbon monoxide alarms that are included on this. Carbon monoxide alarms are currently required for all new construction and new building permits that are issued. Again, the whole green rental housing program is designed to promote the health, the comfort, and the safety, as well as the energy efficiency of units. And so carbon monoxide alarms help contribute to that. We also try to get as creative as possible here to allow as much flexibility to landlords as possible. And so in many cases, compost bins are not already supplied to the tenants. And if the landlord takes the initiative to offer that to the landlord, to the tenants, they can also earn a point for that as well. That's when we're considering our waste streams, we would like to encourage composting and recycling wherever possible. Another big part of, when we're balancing how to improve the efficiency of our units and to reduce carbon emissions, eventually the conversation is going, it always involves both parties, tenants and landlords. And so tenants, because behavior has plays a huge role in the potential carbon emissions that come from a unit, we would like to see that tenants are also learning about those behavior changes. And if a landlord offers those opportunities and or encourages their tenant to participate in an energy conservation class, that we believe that the landlord should get a point for that, for encouraging their tenants to consider their behavior while living in the unit. Then this bonus points section is, again, where a lot of flexibility comes in. There are certain things in here like encouraging alternative transportation modes, or creatively sealing up windows that can't be replaced, say in the historic district, where there are certain requirements. For putting solar on the roof, maximizing the amount of solar potential where possible. Putting motion sensors on the lights can be really helpful in terms of the behavior. So instead of needing to remember to turn off the lights, they just automatically turn off. In multifamily units, there are creative ways that are already being employed at some units for how to put tenants more in more direct contact with their energy consumption. This is for instances where the property management company pays for the utilities, and that can result in a lot of energy losses when you don't have any control over your heat, or you don't pay for it. You don't see that direct impact of your choices. It can be easy for there to be energy losses. And so in cases where landlords have creatively addressed that in something like a ratio-based utility billing system, that you can also earn points for that. While we are looking for your feedback on this checklist and to make sure that we have included as much as possible, we also want to make sure that there is a built-in flexibility for things that don't make it onto this list and should be included. And so there is a particular line item here called unlisted innovative measures. And that is if you're a landlord and you are doing something that you believe is beneficial to the overall quality of the rental and or is reducing carbon emissions, but it's not on this checklist, then submit it to us. Say, hey, I did this cool thing. Here's the impacts of it. And you can get points for that. Up to even 10 points for how, depending on how effective it is. So just keep in mind that you're not restricted only to the things that are on this checklist, but you can submit beyond that. We also incorporated for cases where it's just technically impractical, it's just not going to happen. We do not anticipate to see this often or even at all, but we did add it to the checklist just in case. And that gives you the option to purchase carbon offsets to help make up the difference. So if you're short on points and you can demonstrate that it's just not technically practical for you to achieve those last few points that you need, you can buy carbon offsets and make up for the difference there. And then finally on the checklist is the water conservation section. And so these are points that are still required, but do not count towards the overall score of 65. These are also should be easily attainable. If you put low flow shower heads and faucet aerators throughout the house and the bathrooms and the kitchen, there you go. You've met your points. This also encourages low flow or dual flush toilets. And that's because, first of all, water is a valuable resource, but also moving water is very energy intensive. And so if we can reduce the amount of water that is being consumed, we are indeed directly reducing the carbon emissions that stem from that water. Okay. That is, again, the prescriptive pathway, which is one option for landlords. The other pathway for meeting unit efficiency is the performance pathway. I realize that I breezed right through our break, so I'm going to take just a moment here and give everyone an option or a chance, an opportunity to get some water or do a quick break. I think we'll do just a brief break. Let's call it 4 minutes. So I'll start back up here at 2:53 according to my clock, and we'll take a look at the second unit efficiency pathway, which is performance based. So again, thanks for coming. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Okay. If you can hear me, you can come on back. We'll come back into the presentation here. So, so far we have covered 2 of the 4 main policy components. We discussed the appliance efficiency requirement. We discussed pathway 1 of the unit efficiency, and that pathway option is the prescriptive checklist. And now we're going to take a look at this second pathway to meet the unit efficiency requirement, and that is performance-based. I do see that there are some questions coming in. That's great. Please keep them coming. And once we get through these last 2 policy components, we'll start addressing some questions. So I'm eager to get to those. Thanks everyone for participating. All right, let's move forward here. So, prescriptive checklist, option 1. You can meet all of the requirements listed there and achieve the minimum point value, or you can do a performance-based pathway. So the performance pathway is, whoops, I just lost my screen. I hope it will come back. Just a moment, forgive me. Okay. I'm hoping that you can still see the slide presentation. And I'll assume that you can. Emily, please holler if you don't see that. But
we can see it, Zach. Yeah, it looks good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so the performance pathway is provided as an alternative to the checklist. And this is, again, to give landlords a little more flexibility in choosing how they achieve the unit efficiency requirement. This is still considering the fact that a lot of rentals that are in Ann Arbor were constructed before there were modern building codes. The goal of this is to sort of standardize the expectations for the rentals that are available on the market. Because right now we have some that were built just last year, and we have some that were built in 1900, and it's really difficult to know what to expect as a tenant. And so this is something we heard through the task force, and we're giving a couple of different pathways for that flexibility. And so the performance pathway requires achieving a minimum HERS rating. HERS is a home energy rating system. HERS is nationally recognized. It's a standard for measuring the energy efficiency of a home. It can be conducted on single family or multifamily units. And the quick overview of the way the HERS index is structured, they set a reference home, and a reference home would be one that was constructed to code for the 2006 International Energy Conservation Code. And so they gave that reference home a score of 100, and then structured everything around that. So if you get a HERS rating and it's 150, that means that you're 50% less energy efficient than that reference home. And the goal all around is to get a zero, a HERS rating of 0. And if you achieve that, that means that you have a truly net zero home. A net zero energy home produces as much energy as it consumes. You are not reliant upon the grid to meet your energy needs. And that incorporates a lot of energy efficiency elements in there. So with 150 being the lowest rating on the HERS index, what we decided for the performance pathway for rentals in Ann Arbor was achieving a goal of 110. And that's a moderate goal. It is not the most efficient home, but it certainly would elevate the standard for some rentals. Again, this is a draft. In this survey, we'd like to hear from you of your thoughts on HERS ratings and the selection of 110. The flexibility in this one also comes from the fact that when you get a HERS rating from a qualified assessor, you are given also a list of specific modifications that you can do to your home to improve the performance of that unit. And so you can decide upon which are the highest impact for your home or for your unit and make those changes. And you can choose which changes to make as long as you reach that goal of 110. HERS rating, there is a little bit, there is some cost associated with bringing a assessor to the unit to conduct the rating. That is a cost that kind of, we try to balance that with that score minimum. And because the items that would be given to you in a HERS score will be very specific, as opposed to the prescriptive checklist, which is kind of generic, certainly a little more broad, and we wouldn't necessarily know the impact on each unit for achieving that, because we aren't conducting such a specific test. But the HERS rating would give you very specific and maximum impact recommendations for your home. For multifamily units, if you're wondering how this would apply to multifamily units, the way the recommendation shook out is that you would be required to submit a HERS rating for each different type of unit. What that means is if you have many units, and say an apartment complex, for instance, what we saw in best practices from other municipalities across the country were that they would accept a single HERS rating for each different floor plan layout. Oftentimes in large multi-unit rentals, there are just a few different floor plans, and those are repeated throughout the complex. And so we would require only a HERS rating for one unit of each different type. And then the rating for that floor plan would represent all of the other units for that same floor plan. Okay, and then next is occupant weatherization. This is one that was elevated during the task force discussions to sort of bridge the gap between when this policy could go into effect and when a unit is inspected. This explicitly gives tenants a clear pathway to participate in the improvement of a unit that they do not own. It requires that landlords specify which temporary or permanent actions they will allow the tenant to do to weatherize or improve the unit without penalty. And so this creates a safe space for the tenant to make very specific improvements without risk of security deposit losses or other charges associated with that. When we're talking about weatherization, we mean specifically or generally things like window film, things that do have an impact on the comfort of a unit, but that are easily undoable. There were some concerns raised during the task force and outside of the task force and other conversations that tenants might be penalized for even doing something like the window film. So in where ultimately all units should meet a basic efficiency, this would make up the gap between the time that they would be inspected and have to meet the requirement. And what I mean by that is that if this goes into effect right now, if it's passed by council, it's proposed to go into effect on January 1st of 2023. That would give landlords about 6 or 7 months to prepare for their first inspection. But all rental units, the certificate of compliance inspection process reoccurs every 30 months. And so there will be several units that even when this goes into effect, if it is passed by council, won't be inspected for any of these policy components until 30 months after January 1st. What is that? 2.5 years. So that would be June or July of 2025. And so that's a few years out yet. And so the occupant weatherization would sort of bridge that gap and allow tenants to help the landlord improve their comfort and the efficiency of a unit before the landlord has necessarily done anything to it. So one last policy element here is the efficiency disclosure. There isn't anything new here being presented necessarily. What this policy component states is that depending on whichever unit efficiency pathway the landlord chose, either they chose to get the points from the prescriptive pathway or they chose to get the HERS rating through the performance pathway, whatever the result was, the final points earned or the final HERS score would be included automatically with the inspection report. The inspection reports are already issued for any routine inspection to achieve a certificate of compliance. And so this policy component doesn't actually require any additional action of the landlords, given that they completed the checklist or the HERS rating and provided that to the city for verification. Beyond that, it would be just included with the inspection report, which is already publicly available for all inspections. So that as is the certificate of compliance, you can already find the certificate of compliance for any unit that is rented in the city of Ann Arbor. So this would just fall under that purview. Okay, we are getting near the end here. I just want to give you a more comprehensive look at the timeline, just to illustrate that this timeline starts in January of 2021. We had already begun best practices research, but that's also when the RMI cohort began. And so that's where we chose to start this timeline. This is kind of the history of how we got here. And I've already talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to give you a visual representation that the task force started mid 2021. It went through the end of the year. The RMI cohort did conclude, I think, in August or September of last year. But then the USDN, totally separate rental cohorts. They just happened to kind of overlap. But that's when we began doing the Urban Sustainable Directors Network Learning Group, which is still ongoing. So looking at today, we are still in Q1 of this year. We are launching public comment. We're right here. Last night, this presentation was delivered to the Energy Commission. We will be seeing a review from the Building Department. Like I said, public comment will be open through April 10th. And so once that concludes, we will collect all of the information gathered and review it. We'll figure out if there were any common themes. We'll identify the things that were missed that should be included or should be removed, as suggested by the public comment. If there's anything major that will change about these recommendations as they've been presented today, we'll bring the task force back together to have them take a second look at it, just because they were involved from the beginning. And so we want to make sure that they stay involved throughout the entire process. But once we have something that seems to meet as much of the comments as possible, we'll pass that along to legal review. Once it gets through for final legal review, and once it gets through and signed off on, it will go for council approval for them to decide whether or not they think this is appropriate for the city of Ann Arbor. And so there's still a number of steps before it gets to that point, but even that is not the final point for us. Public engagement will continue. We want this process to be iterative as we continue to implement it. One of the ways that we're testing that right now is we are gathering some test trial runs of the prescriptive checklist. And if you would like to be involved in that, certainly shoot me an email or indicate that in your survey responses, because we'd like to kind of put these things to the test before they are required. And so we will continue that throughout the rest of this year. So even if this does pass and becomes a requirement by the start of next year, we will have had several iterations of it and dry runs, because we want it to make the most sense, be the easiest to achieve as possible, and actually be effective. Excuse me. If it does pass council, then we'll spend the remainder of that year getting our inspectors up to speed, make any staffing adjustments necessary to make sure that we can meet these demands. And again, outreach and community engagement will continue. The Office of Sustainability is here to be a resource for both tenants and landlords. And we want to hear what those what your suggestions are for your needs in terms of support from us, so that we can support you. This is, we want this program to be successful. And in order for it to be successful, we want to be able to respond to the needs and pain points as much as possible from the community. And so that's, again, why we're doing this survey, so that we can hear as much from you as possible. I also want to let you know that a quick reminder that we will be doing a second presentation on, it'll be next Tuesday. It's going to be the same presentation. You're welcome to attend. It's just to give some folks an opportunity who couldn't make it midday, or maybe Wednesday is a bad day. But it'll just be another opportunity there. Okay. Let's get into some questions here and see what folks have. There is a question submitted about the appliance requirements and is asking if this is going to require all of these appliances to be offered in rentals. And the answer to that is no. You will not have to add appliances that aren't already there. This will simply apply to the appliances that are currently offered in your rental. And so the ones that are there, the expectation will be that they will be as efficient as possible. And then a second part of that question is a really excellent question. It's asking, what about the appliances that tenants bring into their own units? So mini fridges or microwaves that they bring in on their own. Is that going to be held against the property owner? Really great question. That is one that was not brought up during the task force, but it kind of lends to the tenant education. And that's where we would like to hear about opportunities that we can best support either tenants and landlords, we being the OSI. What I'm hearing and what I'm seeing from this question is a great opportunity for the OSI to work with landlords to find a way to engage tenants and do that outreach and make sure that they're educated on the appliances that they bring in. I personally do not believe that the landlord should be held responsible for what a tenant brings in to the unit. But that's a really great question and suggestion. And I encourage you to include that in your survey response so that we can record that and make sure that it's appropriately addressed. Continuing on here, I see that there looks like there are some errors in the totals of the max points on the checklist. Thank you for catching those. I apologize if there are some errors in there. I will modify that. It has been modified a number of different times, which is probably where that's coming from. We'll take another look and update that sheet at the one that's available on the website. So thank you for pointing that out. Let's see. Customized to the individual unit. I don't think I fully understand this, but it looks like you're asking if the point values of an air source heat pump are reflected for those that do not need, for ductless mini splits. And the answer to that should be that yes, they should reflect that. Because duct systems so often, almost inherently have leakages throughout the system, a ductless system is going to be the most efficient energy transfer of either of the conditioned air, either the heated or cooled space air. And therefore, if you have a ductless system, and then you are using energy the most efficiently. So there should be points assigned for that. Yes. Another question here about how the city of Ann Arbor in the past had a weatherization ordinance that required a degree of weatherization on rental properties. What happened to this, and what do we know about the history here? I am not sure what the history of that is, and I do know that it was once part of the housing code. There still is a line item in there, or a section of the housing code that does mention this. I think if you ask me, one of the pitfalls of that section of code is that it can be difficult to gauge the effectiveness of it because it was looking only at weatherization. And so one of the things that we are trying to address through this draft green rental housing policy is a more holistic approach that looks at more than just the weatherization of the unit, but the efficiency as a whole. It can be really difficult to gauge the efficacy of weatherization if there isn't any insulation in the unit. That, of course, is going to present a whole set of issues apart from just the weatherization. And so that's why we're including far more than just weatherization and air sealing in this. But it is still very important, which is why it will continue to be included. Some questions here about the rental housing department. Yes, these requirements will be part of the existing rental housing inspection process. And so where landlords are already asked to go through the existing pre-inspection checklist to make sure that they have met all of those items, we will ask that they also complete the prescriptive checklist and tally their points and submit that. That way the inspectors, when they get to the house, are not looking for each item that is on that checklist. They're just looking for what you are declaring you have met, and they're just verifying that it is there. A lot of the things that are on the checklist actually in many ways overlap with some of the things that are already on the prescriptive checklist, but are not explicit. And so where you, for instance, all of the windows must properly open and lock. So an inspector is already looking at that. If you indicated on there that you have done air sealing around that window and you have caulked appropriately around the window trim, for instance, they're already at the window and they can just look to make sure and verify that you have done what you indicated on the prescriptive checklist. So yes, everything that is being presented here will fall under the requirements for the certificate of compliance that already exist under the rental housing inspection process. All right. Let's see. Lots of carrots. Any sticks? The stick as it exists is that failure to meet these requirements that are being set forth just means you don't get your certificate of compliance, and that means that you cannot legally rent. If you have ideas for more carrots, ways that we can incentivize, certainly that's what we are more interested in. We want to make it as easy and as much of a no-brainer as possible to come to work with this. So when folks, so if you have ideas about how we can just really streamline the process for landlords, we would love to hear that. That's something that we heard not only during the task force, but it's also that's our interest as well. We don't want this to be a burdensome process or tricky or convoluted. It should, if we've done our job, then we will have put together a policy that is, of course, yes, that's the easiest thing to do is to comply with that. What about on-site composting rather than just a city cart? That's a really great question. If you have suggestions on how to make on-site composting something that is easily attainable, we'd definitely like to hear that in the survey responses. So please submit that. There are, the thing about a compost pile is that it is a living organism that needs maintenance, and you do need to tend to it and turn it and feed it to make sure that we are it's effective and actually breaking down the compost that's added to it. So I think that's probably why that wasn't included. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion about it, but that's a great suggestion, and we can consider that as part of the policy moving forward. I think that when city composting collection services are offered, certainly the easier pathway is to just do cart collection. But I like where your head's at. DTE has implemented prohibitive rules and rate structures for solar PV. Will this policy support a municipal utility that will implement rules and rates that promote PV, solar, and electrification? There are efforts outside of the green rental housing program that are being undertaken by the Office of Sustainability that are continuing to promote solar and electrification. And so those are things like Solarize, which is a bulk buy program that has been wildly successful in Ann Arbor for getting solar onto the rooftops of residences throughout the city. And those programs will still continue and proceed. As of yet, we have not found any conflict between the existing programs that we are through which we are promoting solar and electrification and green rental housing. Those should continue to work hand in hand, so that we can achieve all of those. Quick note that solar is part of strategy 1 of the A20 plan, which is transferring off of fossil fuels and to 100% renewable energy. Electrification is the entirety of strategy 2, which is making sure that we are electrifying our businesses and our transportation as much as possible. Is this going to increase the cost of a housing inspection? As of yet, it does not appear that this should add any additional costs to the inspection. So I don't anticipate that will go up. Let's see here. How will you deal with owner occupied rental housing? This policy will not address the determination of owner occupied or not rental housing. That structure is already in place at rental housing services and will apply as necessary to this. And so again, because this will just be a part of the existing rental inspection process, if you have a unit that needs to be inspected in order to rent, it will need to meet these requirements as well. If you have demonstrated that it's owner occupied or doesn't need to be inspected, then it won't need to meet these requirements. How much does a HERS inspection cost roughly? I'm glad you threw roughly in there because it ranges a little bit. Depending on the markets, it can be $200 to about $350. They can be less than that, certainly. But that's the rough range for a HERS inspection from a qualified rater. Excuse me. Will you need to bring a new HERS rating for each certificate of compliance review? So I think that this question is getting to the fact that certificates must be renewed every 2.5 years. That is a really excellent question. As the policies have been written, as they are, the recommendations, I mean, yes, it would have to, it would recur just like the rest of the inspection. Now, these are all draft recommendations. If that's not appropriate, or there's another way to do that, you can submit, please include that in your survey. Keep in mind that each time this certificate of compliance comes around, you have the choice of how you want to achieve your your unit efficiency requirement. And so if you in the past were able to do the work that was needed to get the minimum HERS rating of 110, it would presumably follow that at the next one, you could just use the prescriptive checklist to check off all the things that you already did at that last one, and you wouldn't need to incur the expense of another rating because you would already be meeting the things that are on the prescriptive checklist. Perhaps there's opportunity to add more clarification to that in the policy. If you have ideas about that, we welcome them wholeheartedly. Is there any thought of having something like a rental Energy Star rating for properties that go above the required minimum? Great question. We spent time discussing the opportunity for the city recognizing high performers. Part of that, okay, so on one hand, that gets really tricky because we don't want to be the authority on it, on what is qualified or goes above and beyond, because those systems are already in place. You can get, the certifications are already out there. If you do go above and beyond and you get that HERS rating that is 0 or just really awesome, we don't want to set up another way to have to verify that. That's where the disclosure component of this policy comes in, because if you do get a really excellent HERS rating, let's say, or if you go the prescriptive route and you get all available points, and you've got 175 points, that is going to be included in your inspection report, and that's something that can be seen by renters who are looking for a place. So really great question, but we'll let the disclosure portion of that take over instead. Are there any funds or financing available for the improvements that will be associated with this program? Good question. First, I want to state that we chose the point minimums for prescriptive and the 110 minimum of HERS rating as strategically as possible to minimize the amount of work that would be needed by rentals. Something that I think is really important to keep in mind when considering these policy recommendations is that as they stand, most rentals should be able to meet what's already there with little to no modifications to their rental units. The policy certainly will bring everybody up to that. So where some rentals maybe have no insulation or have been not maintained as well as they could have been, there certainly will be some rentals that need more effort than others, but we think that most rentals should be able to meet this. We just want to make sure that it's standardized and we know what all the renters are, where they stand in terms of efficiency. That is to help for renters to be able to anticipate what their energy costs will be before they move into a unit. Something like getting the HERS rating or getting the following prescriptive pathway, then setting that standard for expectations of energy efficiency can be likened to the miles per gallon of an internal combustion engine, or if you're buying an EV, the mileage, the distance rating on that battery. You wouldn't buy a vehicle without knowing what its gas mileage or battery capacity is. Why would we also rent a home or sign a lease where we don't know what that energy cost is going to be? And so that's part of what the Green Rental Housing Program is aiming to achieve. It's just a standardization of what you're getting into before you sign a lease. A very common comment that we hear from tenants is that they sign a lease, and at their financial capacity, and they get there just to find out that their utility bills are $200 or $300, or I've heard even $600 a month. That can be incredibly prohibitive and restrictive to anyone trying to live there. So we just want to standardize that, so reduce those surprises for tenants, but it also, again, is bringing down the carbon emissions that come from these really inefficient units. One final note on the question about funds and the availability of them. There is a climate millage that will be going for vote this November, and it's possible that some of the money from that, if that is to pass, some of the money would be available for doing residential energy efficiency improvements. So there could be some funds available from that millage if that were to pass. So outside of that, I'll repeat that the office is more interested in the success of this program than anything. So we will be tenaciously pursuing other grant funding or federal funding. There's philanthropic funding for doing all sorts of energy efficiency upgrades. And they are becoming more and more plentiful, and we will continue to pursue those on large scales so that they are available to landlords to make modifications as necessary. Perhaps rental properties could get points for participating in the SU once that is in place. Great suggestion. I think that's a really great idea, and would love to hear that through your survey, and so that we can include that for consideration. Okay, we're getting close to time here. Let's see, I'm going to try to scan through and see if there's some high impact questions here. Oh, we're actually overtime by quite a bit here. But I do want to thank you all for participating. Again, this is all a draft. Please do visit the Green Rental Housing website. It's a2gov.org/sustainability/green rental housing. You will find a link there for all of the materials that we reviewed today, a summary of the draft policy recommendations, a draft prescriptive checklist, and also a link to the survey where we would like to collect as much input as possible. So please do complete the survey. We are at time, so if you need to go, feel free to drop. I'm going to stick on for just a minute and try to keep chipping away at some of these questions. But in the meantime, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your week.